words have power because we are kings and our words matter. You take baptism and you change your name and you join the church and you do some Christian rituals and so on. What is Christianity all about? Christianity is about getting back to the God of love and becoming the creatures of love that God always intended us to be.
I'm giving you my heart and all that is within. I lay it all down for the sake of you, my King. I'm giving you my dreams. I'm laying down my rights. I'm giving up my pride for the promise of new life. And I surrender all to you, all to you. And I surrender all to you, all to you. I'm singing you this song. I'm waiting at the cross, and all the world owes me. I'm counting all as lost for the sake of knowing you, the glory of your name, to know the lasting joy in sharing in your pain. And I surrender all to you, all to you. And I surrender all to you, all to you. And I surrender all to you, all to you. Oh, I surrender all to you, all to you. Lord, help us to surrender. Every area of our life. Show us, Lord, where we need to surrender.
Romans chapter 13, verse 8 to 10. Owe no one anything except to love one another, for he who loves another has fulfilled the law. For the commandments, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not murder, you shall not steal, you shall not bear false witness, you shall not covet, and if there is any other commandment, are all summed up in this saying, namely, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. Love does no harm to a neighbor. Therefore, love is the fulfillment of the law. Love is a great theme of the Bible, in the sense that God is love, and this God who is love created everything, and created us in His image and likeness to be like Him, to be creatures of love, to live by love, to walk in love. So, the most important characteristic of a human being created in the image and likeness of God is love. We are meant to live and thrive and flourish in love. And when sin came through Adam, the very first thing that you see there happening is that when they had the first child, Cain, he turned out to be a murderer who killed his own brother. Exact opposite nature of love. Something has happened through sin. Devil's nature has now come into man. The man has become a slave of the devil. Man has given his life to the devil. The devil now rules and reigns in man's life. So Adam and Eve produced a child with great expectation. Chapter 4, verse 1, where we read about the birth of Cain, Eve was very excited when Cain was born because she thought this is the child that God prophesied about in Genesis 3:15, in the first promise of the coming Messiah, where God said to the serpent, I will make enmity between your seed and her seed. He will bruise your head and you will bruise his heel. So this is a prophecy waiting to be fulfilled. Eve, having lost the Garden of Eden and all the blessings, having come out of the garden, now waiting for a revenge to come upon the Satan who has ruined her life and her family. She was hoping that that child, the seed of the woman, would be this child, Cain. But when Cain was born, she had such expectations. She says in Genesis 4:1, behold, I have begotten a man from the Lord. She thought this is a child from God. What a wonderful thing. He's going to crush the head of Satan who ruined our life. And lo and behold, he happened to be a child of Satan, a murderer who killed his own brother. Marked a difference from what God's nature is to what man's nature is now. Man made in the image and likeness of God is no more like that now. Now he's become a murderer. Now, since then, wickedness has been there in the world and it's been in the hearts of men. Not everybody manifests itself in murder, but murder is in the heart. That is why 1 John chapter 3, where John writes about loving one another, he says, you're born again believers, you're children of God. Don't be as Cain, who murdered his own brother. Let not that murderous spirit be in you, he says. He's pointing out to Cain, because that's where it started. Don't be as Cain. The first manifestation of this hatred, murderous spirit. Don't be like Cain, but love one another, he says. So this is a great theme from the Bible. You know, it originates from God, who is love, creating the world, man sinning, then the devil's nature, the murderous spirit coming in hate and animosity, all of violence, all of this entering in. And then thereafter that dominating the earth and becoming a big factor. Then Jesus coming in. And even in the Old Testament, when God chose the people of Israel and gave them the 10 Commandments, the 10 Commandments, in essence, was about love. All of the 10 Commandments. Because Jesus, when asked the question about the commandment, which one is greater, or the greatest commandment, he said, the first and the greatest commandment is that love your God, Lord your God, with all your heart, with all your mind, with all your soul, and with all your strength. And the second one is just like this one, he said. And that is, love your neighbor as yourself. These are the two great commandments. The law and the prophets rest on these two commandments, he said. So Jesus reduced the 10 commandments into two. Some people may say, well, what happened to the rest of the 8? Well, the 8 are in this too. All the 10 are found in this too. If you look at the 10 commandments, the first 4 commandments have to do with loving God, and the last 6 commandments having to do with loving others. So that's what Jesus said. The greatest commandment is love God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. The second, or the one just like it, or equally important, just like it, there is another one, he says, and that is love your neighbor as yourself. So Jesus, in his understanding and in his interpretation, he interpreted the law like this. The law consisted of 2 things, loving God and loving your neighbor. That's the essence. And then later on in John chapter 13, he brings it down and makes it into one. He says, A new commandment I give unto you, that you love one another, even as I have loved you, so that the world may know that you are my disciples. The 9 other commandments haven't disappeared. He is giving the essence of the law. What is the essence of the law? What is the essence of the 10 commandments? It's love. Love is the essence of the 10 commandments. That's been the issue from the beginning. That's the problem with the world from the beginning. See, that is why this teaching is so important, because we need to understand what the problem is with this world and why we are in such a mess, why the world is as it is, and why many times our lives are like that, and why we find such hatred and animosity and all of these things in this world, in our own surroundings, even within our limited circles. Why such things exist, why there is such unhappiness in this world. And what does it mean to be a Christian? What does it mean to live a Christian life? What is Christianity all about? Is it a religion that you take baptism and you change your name and you join the church and you do some Christian rituals and so on? What is Christianity all about? Christianity is about getting back to the God of love and becoming the creatures of love that God always intended us to be. That's what Christianity is all about. That's why this teaching is so important. And loving one another is based on this whole theme that is there in the Bible, this whole issue that runs as a thread from the book of Genesis all the way down to Revelation in the last chapter. So we looked at 1 John, and he talks about it everywhere. And one thing he mentions there is that in the last verse of chapter 4, where he closes his thing on love and loving one another, he says, this is a commandment that we have received from him, he says, referring to this teaching on loving one another. He says, this is a commandment. This is not my teaching. He says, this is something I received from Jesus. What is he talking about? He's talking about Jesus saying, a new commandment I give unto you, that you love one another. That commandment is the thing that he was giving an exposition of in 1 John chapter 2, 3, and 4. So this is a commandment, he says, that I received from Jesus. Jesus gave this commandment, he says. And not just once. You read chapter 2, 3, and 4 when you have time. It's very interesting how many times he repeats the fact that this is based on the commandment that has always been there from the beginning. Always been there from the beginning. That means it's been in the Old Testament in the form of 10 commandments. It's been there with Jesus' teaching. And now he is teaching it, and now Paul is teaching it. Now today we're going to look at Paul. How does he teach love? How does he teach loving one another? What is his understanding? One of the values of what we're doing right now is this teaching that we're going to do today, and probably 1 or 2 weeks more on this passage, is going to bring great understanding on the nature of the law. There's a lot of misunderstanding going on today in this world about the nature of the law. Is the law necessary? Is the law good? Is the law relevant for today? What about the law today? Do we need it? Don't need it? There are some issues going on in the world today everywhere. So I think all of that will be cleared in our mind, and it will all relate to the fact of how we should love one another and how that should be our life. Very interesting. He says, owe no man anything except to love one another. For he who loves another has fulfilled the law. So you got to understand what he means when he says, owe no one anything except to love one another. In order to understand this whole thing about loving one another. Why does he put it this way? Owe no man anything except to love one another. For he who loves another fulfill the law. And the rest of it is the expansion of this statement that he has made. Now, Paul, as you know, in the book of Romans, teaches the basic doctrines first. In the first 11 chapters, he goes through the doctrine of salvation, basically, justification by faith. Talks about how man is a sinner and what God has done and what has happened to man now, and so on. After he finishes 11th chapter, 12th chapter is the beginning of the practical side of the Christian life. His epistles are always like that. The first half is about doctrine, the second half is about practical. Some people say, I'm a very practical person. Leave out the doctrine. Just concentrate on the practical. Give us the practical. Well, if you want the practical, what will you practice if you don't have a theory? See, theory and practice is important. Practice is based on theory. So always, first he gives the doctrine, then only he gives the practical. In Ephesians, first 3 chapters doctrine, then next 3 chapters is practice. So he does the same here. So chapter 12 is the beginning of his whole teaching on Christian life and how to live it practically. And a lot of injunctions, a lot of commandments, a lot of do this, don't do this type of thing. Starting from chapter 12 onwards, all the way running into chapter 13 and so on. So that is the way he begins it. And when he comes down to a certain point, he says, he's beginning to talk about loving one another, and he says, "Owe no one anything except to love one another, for he who loves one another, for he who loves another has fulfilled the law." Now, what does he mean by this? Why does he put it this way? Owe no man anything except to love one another. Why does he put it that way? Now, this is not some new thought here. He begins in verse 7 actually. The idea of owing and paying what you owe begins in verse 7. Look at verse 7. See, verse 1 to 6, he's talking about authorities in this world and how we must obey the authorities because they are God ordained. All authority comes from God. Therefore, worldly authorities are from God. Therefore, we must obey them and do the right thing before them, respect them, honor them, and so on. He talks about that. And then verse 7, he says, Render therefore to all their due. He's talking about the governmental authorities, the tax department, customs department, and all these various departments he's talking about. He says, render therefore to all their dues. That is, whatever is owed to them. That's what it means, right? You who speak English know it very well. Render therefore to all their due means you owe something to someone, pay it. Pay the dues, he says. So there it starts, the owing and paying back. Owing and responsibly making the payments is starting there. Render therefore to all their dues. Taxes to whom taxes are due, customs to whom customs, fear to whom fear, honor to whom honor. Just pay it, he says. This is due. You owe this. You owe honor to the authorities in this world. You owe taxes, so you pay it. You owe customs, so you pay it. You owe these things. Pay these things. Pay whatever is due, he says. And then he says in verse 8, owe no man anything except to love one another. So this verse 8, where he says, owe no man anything except to love, is a follow-on of verse 7, really. What he means is, discharge your obligations toward all men and never be behind in that respect. Never be behind in discharging your obligations before everyone. Now, what does this mean? Owe no man anything. Now, some people have taken this and have taught that it's wrong to borrow at all. So they've taught a whole doctrine of why you should not borrow. But personally, I like the idea of not borrowing. I wish that we could all just not borrow at all. I would prefer that very much for myself as well as for everyone. This borrowing really, doesn't sit well with me. But the borrowing is happening in this world today. Certainly the Apostle Paul is not teaching against borrowing here, because there are other Bible verses that teach about borrowing. The Bible says, if your brother is in need, don't be tight-fisted. Open your hands to him. Give to him when he is in need. When he wants to borrow from you, give it to him, he says. So you can give, it seems. You can lend. If you can lend, then someone can borrow. Then only you can lend. How can you make it illegal to borrow and make it legal to lend? It's not possible. So Bible talks about lending, therefore borrowing must be all right. Bible also talks about usury and interest. In the New Testament, Jesus told a story about the talents, One was given 5 talents, another 2 talents, another was given 1 talent. The guy who had the 1 talent wrapped it up in a piece of cloth because he thought this is a difficult master. He he likes to reap where he has not sown, like some men, hard people, very tough businessman, So he wrapped it up and kept it until he came back, and while the one who received the 5 talents made it into 10, the other who received 2 made it into 4, multiplied it, increased it. This man had not increased it, he had wrapped it up and kept it and returned it to Jesus safe, thinking that he'll be appreciated for that. And Jesus called him you wicked fellow, he said. Why? He said, you kept the thing and never worked on it and never increased it. He said, you should have at least turned it into the bank. I would have taken it back with interest. So it's all right to put the money in the bank, get interest, and so on. So Bible is not teaching about that. And we also realize, suppose you want to buy a house, you also realize, when are you going to save enough money to buy, if you want to save, nowadays even to buy a flat, it costs nearly 1 crore rupees, You want to save 1 crore, you'll have to work all your lifetime sometimes, to just have that much money left. So if you're trying to save up to buy a house, it's very difficult to save up and buy. Meanwhile, you're paying rent. So the smartest thing to do is to, instead of pay the rent, buy a house and pay the monthly payment like rent, But except this time, your rent is not rent. It's all deposited in your account, If you found a house flat for 50 lakhs, you go on, for 10 years later, 20 years later, that thing will be, who knows how much, 10 crores it'll be, You'll never be able to get it. But when it's 50 lakhs, you can probably apply a loan and get it and pay the rent, pay the dues on it. And therefore, I think it's not a bad thing to borrow. But if you are getting behind on your payments, then you're owing. If you're keeping up with your payments, then you don't owe any man anything, right? And I'm sure Paul is concerned kind of a little bit about these things also when he writes, because now they have become Christians. They were all sinners before. I'm sure that world at that time was no different from our world today. Today, the banks, some of the people in the banks I've talked to, some people, they say some of them borrow money and disappear. That's their job, They borrow money by the crores and they disappear, never show up, and you cannot collect from them. Sinners do that, And Paul doesn't want saints to do that. Paul doesn't want saints to drag the Lord's name out there and dirty it all around the town, Paul wants Christian people to be people who pay their bills in time, their dues in time, and so on. I'm sure that he's got something of that in his mind. Don't be like the world. If the man who has lent you the money has to come and knock on your door and talk about you, there's a Christian staying here. Where is he gone? They say he's gone to the fasting meeting. But he's not paying the bill, He's not paying the due, but he's interested in fasting meeting. He's gone to the fasting and prayer, And so that guy comes and stands at your door, and there's a big cross on your door. He says, my God, how can I knock on the cross? So here is God's name dragged out. He says, and he finds a few Christians like that in town. Then he goes around talking, saying, all these Christians are like that. I have so many Christian customers. Half of them don't pay their bills. You have to knock on their door all the time. They're out there in somewhere fasting and praying. They've gone to all-night prayer, all-day prayer and all this, but they're not paying the... See, the Lord's name is dragged out in the world and put to shame. I'm sure Paul has something like that in mind. But also, not only the Lord's name is ruined, our relationships are ruined. A lot of quarrels and a lot of misunderstandings, a lot of animosity between people is created because of this borrowing business, especially when someone borrows and does not pay back in time and pay back responsibly. Amen?
I will give you all my worship. I will give you all my praise. You alone I long to worship. You alone are worthy of my praise. rise to your throne. I will trust you. I'll trust you alone. I'll give you all my worship. I'll give you all my praise. You, Lord, I long to worship. You, Lord, are worthy. I'll give you all my worship. I'll give you all my praise. You, Lord, I long to worship. You, Lord, are worthy of my praise. I will give you all my worship. I will give you all my praise. You, Lord, I long to worship. You, Lord,